Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green and the Socialist Party's candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast is called Green Socialist Notes, and it's about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on in 2020. And there's a lot to talk about. We've had guests the last couple of weeks, and the world is moving on at a fast pace. So let's start with the carnage going on overseas. And before we get to Iran, I think we need to remember, while everybody's focused on Iran, that there's mass killing of civilians going on in Palestine and Ukraine. In Palestine, the Israeli Defense Forces have turned the aid stations for people getting food into killing fields. They're shooting not only live bullets, but even tank shells at people gathered at these things, which seem to be setups. I mean, since they started a few weeks ago, over 400 have been killed and 3,000 wounded by the mass murderers of the IDF. And the organization doing this because Israel won't let UNRWA, the United Nations agency, or anybody else in there. It's called the Gaza Humanitarian Organization, set up by Israel and the Trump administration, and it's headed by a messianic evangelical Christian who supports Israel's rampage because he wants to hasten the apocalypse and the second coming of Jesus for Judgment Day. And the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, has the same fanatical views. And, this is a crime of genocide being given biblical sanction by these zealots. I mean, they are jihadis, like the most fundamentalist Islamic jihadis. And basically the lunatics have taken over the insane asylum in terms of U.S. policy in Israel, which was never good, but now it's totally nuts. And then meanwhile, in Ukraine, Russia has accelerated its drones and ballistic missiles and cruise missiles targeting civilian apartment blocks in Ukrainian cities because they know Trump isn't supporting Ukraine anymore. No consequences that they're worried about at this point. Scores of civilians have been killed by these strikes while the world's attention is now focused on first Gaza, now Iran. And this is terrorism. It's a war crime. It's killing civilians for political objectives. And Russia thinks they're going to demoralize the Ukrainians into surrender. But you look at the polls by the Kyiv International Institute for Sociology, which has been conducting polls since the beginning of the war. These recent bombings have only strengthened the resolve of the Ukrainians to keep resisting the Russian invaders as long as necessary. Less people are willing to, give away territory to Russia for an unjust peace. So the other thing to keep in mind is another war crime. Russia is holding 8,000 POWs, but also holding 16,000 adult Ukrainian political prisoners that they've taken in the occupied territories because these people will not submit to Russification, take the Russian passport and, pay allegiance to Putin. And there's an additional, at least we have documented 19,500 or so children that have been abducted from the occupied territories. And of course, Putin was indicted or a warrant issued for his arrest by the International Criminal Court for that a couple of years ago. And then this week, just to put salt in the wounds, Putin offered to trade Ukrainian children for Russian POWs that Ukraine holds. I mean, he's holding the children now as hostages, and that just adds to the depravity of his, war crime of abducting Ukrainian children. So, at this point, there is legislation before the House we need to push with respect to Israel, its support for bills for an arms embargo on Israel, and with respect to Ukraine, bills for stronger sanctions. As far as weapons go, there was a small token proposal in the House Appropriations Committee this week for $300 million in military aid. It's just token. And it was defeated in the House Appropriations Committee, and not only by Republican votes. Meanwhile, earlier this week, Zelensky was scheduled to meet with Trump at the G7 meeting in Canada, but Trump left before Zelensky got there, saying he had to come back and get ready for the war in Ukraine. And, Ukraine and its European allies, they recognize now that Trump is with Putin. But they hesitate to publicly criticize him because Trump can still do more damage to Ukraine. There's no weapons coming or any more than was already in the pipeline. But the U.S. is still sharing intelligence with Ukraine, which is very important so they, know where and how Russia's attacking them. But Trump, they're in the same camp now, could cut that off, which would, really hurt Ukraine's ability to defend itself. The other thing I just want to say, and I'll stop on Ukraine, is, the narrative you get from the campus who don't want to support Ukraine, often in the mainstream media, that Russia is winning this war. And what that means is the implicit message is, so we shouldn't help Ukraine. They can't win. And the fact is it's a stalemate. You got to remember, Russia thought they'd take Kyiv in 3 days. And 50% of the territory they captured in the early days of the war was recaptured by Ukraine. And then the front lines have basically been a stalemate. Meanwhile, Ukraine is hitting Russia hard behind the front lines. We all know about the spiderweb operation that took out a third of the strategic bombers of Russia that were being used to launch these missiles at Ukrainian cities. A third of the Black Sea fleet of Russia is at the bottom of the Black Sea, and the other 2/3 is hiding out in ports on the far side of the Black Sea away from Ukraine. And I could go on, but this is war is unpredictable, and don't underestimate the Ukrainians, because everybody thought, U.S. thought, Western Europe thought, Putin thought they'd be rolled over in a few days when this war began. And they're still standing and holding Russia to a standstill. Don't give up on Ukraine. Now let's turn to the war on Iran, which is a war crime of aggression on the part of Israel and the U.S. Netanyahu and Trump claim that Iran was on the verge of deploying nuclear weapons. That's a lie. It's like the WMD lie that they used to justify the war against Iraq. The intelligence assessments from the U.S., from other European countries, the International Atomic Energy Agency, all say that, as far as they know, there's not been a political decision by Iran to develop weapons, and they don't have the raw materials at this time. Although it wouldn't take them long to just do that if they decided to do it, but they haven't decided to. So there was no hurry to go and attack Iran like Israel said. And let's also be clear that the U.S., even though they haven't sent their B-2 bomber to drop the 30,000-pound bunker buster on the Fordow nuclear enrichment site that's buried in a mountain, we're already supplying weapons and munitions to Israel. We're sharing intelligence with them about Iran's air defenses and their military operations. The U.S. is shooting down Iranian missiles and drones that are targeted at Israel, and reportedly refueling Israeli bombers in the air with U.S. air tankers. I'm not sure about that. I haven't seen good confirmation, but that's been reported. So, and the other thing Israel did here was force an end to negotiations on a new Iran nuclear agreement that was ongoing. And the U.S., on Thursday when they attacked, the U.S. was supposed to meet again with Iran on Sunday. And of course, the attack scuttled that. And Trump was taco again. Trump always chickens out. He got punked by Netanyahu. He said, we want negotiations. Netanyahu attacked Iran. And now Trump is saying, we, quote unquote, we have, air superiority over Iran. He's trying to get into Netanyahu's slipstream and try to get some credit. I mean, this guy he has no backbone with anybody. So, the big question everybody's talking about is, U.S. going to bomb Fordo, the underground nuclear enrichment site. And yeah, that would be a escalation. And it's questionable whether it would even take the site out. I mean, you can read in the press that military experts, and this has been discussed in the administration, are saying these 30,000-pound bunker busters can't do it. It would take a tactical nuke. They're not recommending that, but that's the reality. So we may drop the bunker busters and they won't destroy this site. They can damage the entrances, but the point is Iran is not going to just roll over, no matter how much we pound them. I mean, we did that to Vietnam. We did that to Iraq. And, you know, when people are attacked, they fight back. They want to defend their families and their homes and their country. And, you know, this is in danger of escalating. There's reports that China's already flying military equipment into Iran, and also the Pakistani military leaders were reportedly in Iran this week to give them advice and see what they need. You got Ayatollah Sistani, who, you know, goes back to the Iraq War and was, you know, one of those who has a lot of pull with the Shia community in Iraq. He's threatening to call the Shia militias into the fight against U.S. bases in Iraq and maybe other places. And Iran, you know, can still aim its missiles if it gets, you know, if the U.S. bombs the Fordo nuclear site, then Iran may decide, okay, we're going to bomb U.S. military bases in the region, which probably don't have the same air defenses that Israel does. So that could cause damage. And then the U.S. would get more involved, you know, striking their conventional sites. Iran can mine the Hormuz Strait, which would interrupt 20 to 30% of the world's oil shipments. I mean, there's a lot of ways this could spin out of control into a much bigger conflict. And then, you know, the European countries were pathetic up there at the G7 summit in Canada. While Trump was there, they issued a statement getting behind Israel's attack on Iran. And this was after they had been criticizing Israel for its actions in Gaza and threatening some sanctions. And then they turn around and with Trump there, line up with Israel, but now they're meekly calling for diplomatic solution that's impossible as long as Israel's bombing Iran. And Israel's going to keep bombing Iran just to prevent that from happening. And they're talking about weeks of activities. So it's really a bad situation. I mean, for us, we got to stand independent of the campism that supports Russia or the U.S. NATO bloc. You know, I've been on this podcast condemning the hypocrisy of pro-Russia campists who condemn Israel's aggression against Gaza, but support Russia's aggression against Ukraine. They're not anti-imperialists. They're ultra-imperialists. They support one imperialism against another. We need to be consistent anti-imperialists, and we need to be just imperialists. We need to be just as critical of the pro-Western campus who support Ukraine, but not the Palestinians or the Iranians from aggression, as we are against the pro-Russian imperialists who support Palestine, but not Ukraine. So let's also remember, I mean, Iran is a far-right, theocratic, militaristic, and imperialist state. We should condemn its repression of domestic oppositional pro-democracy movements, condemn its execution last year of at least 975, mostly political dissidents, by far the most executions of any country in the world. We should condemn their proxy wars, their so-called axis of resistance in Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, Palestine, and Israel, a lot of those terrorist actions. And we should oppose Iran becoming a nuclear weapons power. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't also condemn the war on Iran. Nuclear proliferation can be dealt with diplomatically. We had a nuclear non-proliferation deal with Iran that was negotiated under the Obama administration and Trump pulled out of. And now he's trying to negotiate back to that position. They were underway until Israel attacked Iran. Iran still wants to conclude a deal with the U.S. for non-proliferation of weapons, but this war is preventing that. What happens to Iran domestically is up to the Iranian people. This idea that this foreign attack is going to be regime change. There is no, organized party or recognized leader that can take the power in Iran anyway. I mean, if the regime crumbles, it's likely to be a free-for-all. There are ethnic groups, Kurds, Balochs, Azeris. There's religious sectarian divisions. I mean, it could get really ugly, like it has in Libya, like it did in Syria, when there was not a clear leadership, or in the case of Syria, a dictator was willing to kill all his own people to stay in power. So we should support Ukraine's pro-democracy movement, even as this war is going on. We need to speak up for it in solidarity, demand that the U.S. and other countries provide asylum for Iranians who've been persecuted by this regime, and by demanding an end to Israel's war of aggression, which the pro-democracy leaders in Ukraine are now demanding. I mean, they're not going to go out and try to overthrow the regime when the country's under attack. In fact, we see the pro-democracy leaders calling for the war to stop, for Israel to stop, for the U.S. to stop. We even see women without hijabs, which, during the Women Life Freedom demonstrations, could have got them killed. They're out on the streets now chanting, get the atom bomb for Ukraine. I mean, for Iran. I mean, the people are rallying around the Ukrainian flag. So this war doesn't help the pro-democracy movement in any way. And then it's not going to help nuclear non-proliferation. I mean, the regime is likely to conclude now that they need nukes to defend themselves, like North Korea did after the U.S.-led regime change operations in Iraq and Libya, who had abandoned their nuclear weapons programs, and like now South Korea, Japan, and Poland are doing after Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994, and the U.S.'s nuclear umbrella and defense alliances with those countries are not reliable with Trump in office. So these wars of aggression by nuclear powers against non-nuclear powers just leads to nuclear proliferation. And I'm afraid that's what this war in Iran is going to do. Iran is going to get nuclear weapons now. They're going to side politically. They're going to have to do that even after all this destruction. It takes a while. They have thousands of scientists with nuclear training. They can get it done. And so, if you want nuclear non-proliferation, this is the worst thing that could happen to it. And then as far as Trump's decision to join Israel in this war, that's another impeachable offense. Only Congress can declare war. It's in the Constitution. There are bills in Congress to require the president to get authorization to go to war with Iran. And there's a better bill that just says, stop the war on Iran. We should be contacting our congressional delegations to support both of those bills. But who's going to have the guts? Well, there are some impeachment bills. They should add the war in Iran to the list of reasons for impeachment. Not that it's going to go far in this Republican House. And now let's turn to the war at home. Trump's police state actions and the resistance. The ICE body snatchers are grabbing people without warrants, without due process. They are often grabbing people who are showing up, following the rules, going to immigration hearings, and they're getting grabbed even before they go into the hearing. And a lot of these people doing the grabbing are ununiformed, masked thugs. And you saw what happened to Brad Lander, the comptroller in New York, who accompanied a man to an immigration hearing with his 8 months pregnant wife. And when they came out of the hearing, ICE grabbed him. Lander was holding the arm of the immigrant, and he was physically separated and then arrested. And Brad Lander is just the latest. We got Newark's Mayor Ras Baraka, the New Jersey House Representative LaMonica McIver. You saw California Senator Alex Padilla wrestled to the ground after trying to ask a question of Kristi Noem. Was it Kristi Noem? I get those people mixed up. Anyway, of the Homeland Security, the head of Homeland Security. And remember the Milwaukee County Court judge who tried to stop an immigrant who had just gone through a hearing in her court from being detained. She told him the back way out. And now she's being charged. This kind of law enforcement abuse of elected officials is really unprecedented in American history. And, you know, most authoritarian regimes like Hungary or Turkey, they don't try to do it all at once and fast. They do it step by step. And then Trump also has the military on the streets of Los Angeles, the National Guard and the Marines. They're still there. There are no demonstrations going on, or they're very small. They weren't needed anyway. It wasn't the kind of uprising that Trump implied. They're there to intimidate people who are protesting and resisting ICE raids. So, you know, I think Trump may be overreaching. I got a couple articles that let's put in the chat, one by Neil Abrams and the other by John Pfeffer of Foreign Policy in Focus. And, you know, they argue that, you know, Trump is reaching too far too fast and that the resistance, he's going to be defeated by the resistance. Our civil society is pretty strong. We saw that over the No Kings demonstration last Saturday. And, you know, the takeaway from these articles, why I want to share them, is that they argue that popular resistance can stop Trump and his authoritarian moves. Those No Kings Day demonstrations last week were the largest in U.S. history. Roughly 5 million people, but, you know, one expert with using photo imagery, satellite imagery to estimate crowds at over 2,200 locations, got a figure of 4 to 6 million. Let's call it 5 million. That's between 1% and 2% of the U.S. population. And we know from well-regarded, pretty famous research by Erica Chenoweth, who's at Harvard now, that 3.5% of the population participating in demonstrations is kind of the threshold for regime change, revolutionary change. She also finds, in going over the data, that nonviolent movements are twice as likely to succeed as armed uprisings. And we'll put a link about that research from a BBC article, and it refers to the original research if you want to read that. So we're about halfway to 3.5%. So we need to keep building the resistance. We can stop Trump. And, you know, I want to also point out, Trump is so divorced from reality that he cannot carry out his fantasies. He's not only going against the popular resistance and building it by his actions, he's going against the physics of nature and technologies that are now available. And let's post this other article by Alfred McCoy, who points out that Trump can't stop the clean energy revolution in power and transportation any more than horses could stop the automobile. Clean energy is simply cheaper than fossil and nuclear fuels for electric power and powering motor vehicles. And he can take away the incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act for electric vehicles and clean energy. But low energy costs from renewables are still going to destroy his drill baby drill and dig baby dig dreams for oil, gas, and coal. So that's not to say that we can rely on market forces to decarbonize the economy and address the climate crisis. That's going to require public ownership and planning to decarbonize all sectors. That includes industry, manufacturing, agriculture, and buildings, as well as power and transportation, where these low electric costs from renewables are having an impact already. And we need that public ownership and planning in order to coordinate the complicated transition on a rapid timescale that we need to prevent catastrophic climate change. So, but the main point I want to make there, and that's what this article by Alfred McCoy says, is that Trump can't, repeal what's going on in the energy markets, by fiat. The things he doesn't have all the power. So just on those hopeful notes, I also, because people asked about it last week, want to talk about the Zoran Mamdani campaign for New York City mayor. I think there's a lot to take away from it, a lot that's should give us hope. The election is this coming Tuesday, June 24th. It's a partisan race, unlike local races for many of you around the country. Like all mayoral and council races in New York State are partisan. Already over 100,000 have voted early, and they expect a turnout of around 1 million. So Zoran Mamdani is a DSA affiliated, Democratic Socialist of America, self-identified Democratic Socialist, who is running a closer and closer second to Andrew Cuomo in the polls. Now, Andrew Cuomo, of course, is the archetypical neoliberal corporate Democrat, and he has a dirty reputation for corruption and sexual harassment. I ran against him 3 times. I don't want to go into the details, but they're pretty disqualifying. But he's the moderate, and Mamdani's become the progressive in this race as it's broken down. Mamdani's been a Democratic member of the state assembly since 2020. He was born in Uganda. He's of Indian descent and moved to the U.S. at age 7. He's 33 today. His parents are pretty famous. One is Mahmoud Mamdani, who's a well-known left-wing sociologist at Columbia University, well-known for his writings on the anti-colonial movement, and Mira Nair, who's an Indian-American filmmaker who's best known for Mississippi Masala. And, his parents are political. Zoran's middle name is Kwame, after Kwame Nkrumah, the Ghanaian African independence leader in the 50s and 60s. So the highlights of Zoran's platform include free public bus transportation, free public child care, city-owned grocery stores in the food deserts, capping rent hikes in rent-regulated apartments, a social housing authority to build 200,000 new units of affordable public housing over the next 10 years, a $30 minimum wage in the city by 2030, and higher taxes on the top 1% and the corporations to pay for his programs. It's a great economic justice program. He's less ambitious on climate action than I would like to see. He basically limits himself to implementing existing programs that the council's adopted but have been neglected under Eric Adams, the current mayor. I would like to see a New York City Green New Deal centered around municipalizing the private investor-owned utility Con Ed and using the revenues and powers of that utility to rapidly build out clean power generation and rapidly decarbonize through electrification the transportation and building sectors of New York City, as well as the electric power. And that would be a great example for the country on a scale that would matter. The other issue that Zoran Mamdani is emphasizing, or at least not running away from, is his support for the Palestinians' human rights. And Cuomo and the Zionists in New York City are attacking Mamdani for his advocacy of Palestinian human rights. And of course, it goes to bigoted Islamophobic dog whistling about Mamdani. But those attacks, I think, have probably brought Mamdani more attention than he would have got otherwise, certainly from people who support Palestinian rights, but just from people looking for an alternative to Cuomo. And then one of the things I think we need to learn from this campaign is what it takes to run a serious campaign at this scale. New York's a city of over 8 million people, and it's bigger than a lot of states, most states maybe. And this week his campaign is saying they've had 40,000 volunteers knock on over 1 million doors, and they're still going. I mean, it's a ground operation like nothing the Greens or even the Democrats, for that matter, have conducted in New York or in any other city. And we'll put an article in the chat about Mamdani's canvassing program that was written about 2 weeks ago. Give you an idea. The numbers in there have grown since that article was written. It was in Jacobin by Lisa Featherstone. And I think another thing to learn about how they were able to pull off this massive canvassing operation is they had an organization. It's DSA. DSA has about 80,000 members nationwide and a budget of about $7 million. They got a budget because members, their standard dues are $15 a month or $180 a year. So they got some resources to do something. And in New York City itself, they started this campaign with about 5,000 members. They're the core of the volunteer base. Mamdani's campaign is not shy about recruiting members to these volunteers to DSA, and reportedly thousands have joined. So DSA is growing in New York City out of this. And DSA is like a mass membership party operating within the Democratic Party. You know, it's sizable. They pay dues. They make their own decisions independently. And it's by that, you know, because of that, they're able to have influence in Democratic primary elections. But on the other hand, it's not really independent of the Democratic Party. You know, the world's second most enthusiastic capitalist party, as Kevin Phillips said a long time ago. So while some DSA members contended, and they've contended this since the 2010s, that this party within the party model will lead to a so-called dirty break, where the progressives in the corporate wing of the party will no longer be able to stay in the same place, and either the progressives will take over the Democratic Party and turn it into a Democratic Socialist Party, or more likely, they'll break away and form a new Democratic Socialist Party. The reality is there's not so much talk about the dirty break as there was 5 or 10 years ago, because the logic of working within the Democratic Party leads to further entrenchment in the Democratic Party. I mean, I can give a lot of examples, but just look at Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. He had to commit to supporting the winner of the Democratic primaries, which he and everybody else thought would be Hillary Clinton. So he had to commit to supporting Hillary Clinton in the general in order to get into the primary debates and onto the Democratic ballot lines in the states. So if you don't do that, you're ostracized. You can't even get access. So it'll be interesting to see what Mamdani does if he doesn't win the primary. Will he continue as a Working Families Party candidate? Does he want to do that? Will Working Families Party want to do that? He hasn't had the same pressures not to go independent that, say, Sanders had, because Cuomo has also set up an independent line to run on if he loses the primary. So it would be hard to condemn Mamdani if Trump was doing it anyway. And, you know, DSA has a lively internal political culture. Many publications and caucuses discussing public policy, debating DSA strategy. And, you know, that's what the Greens should have. But, you know, being a dues-paying mass membership party that's serious about organizing and not just talking online or mobilizing for events others organize is how, you know, they've built that out. But the other thing is to note about DSA is because it's in the Democratic Party, it's getting pulled further and further in. Another thing, and this is the last article we'll put in the chat, is Mamdani has a very strong social media campaign. I think his messaging is better than even than AOC, who's very good at it. He comes across as friendly and humorous, but he's clear and concrete on policy, and, you know, can really explain it. I would suggest you search the internet for some of his videos that he's made and his TV appearances where he's interviewed. Look online and you'll see what I mean. And then, you know, on the other hand, his opponent, Andrew Cuomo, he's counting on the votes of moderate white, Black, and Latino voters, who he's reaching by name recognition and millions of dollars in advertising. He doesn't have a ground game. He thinks money can beat organized organized people. This is a test of that. Mamdani does have a decent budget. He's got $8 million, most of it provided by New York City's public finance system. And Mamdani was the first to max out on the maximum that the system will give you for a mayoral race. That's $8 million. And he raised that with 18,000 small donations worth $1 million. And it's an 8-to-1 match in New York City. So that turned to $8 million. When he reached that threshold, he stopped fundraising and said, come out and canvass with us and do other things to build the campaign. Of course, Cuomo's attacking Mamdani as too young, too inexperienced, and too left. But I think those attacks are also bringing people to Mamdani. So now the other thing to realize about this election is that's ranked choice vote in the primary, but plurality winner in the general. So Mamdani has a good chance of beating Cuomo. Some of the polls say when they ask people to go through their preferences, he's within 1% or 2 of Cuomo. I think in one he was even won. There are about 11 serious candidates, and most of them lean progressive. So if as they get knocked out, their choices are more likely to go to Mamdani than Cuomo. So, I'm really interested to see what happens with the Working Families Party line. They have a tradition of supporting Democrats, odious Democrats like Andrew Cuomo. They did 3 times when I was running. But it could be different this year, given that Cuomo's already said he's going to take an independent line. And Cuomo has trashed WFP for years in the media. So there's no love lost between the Working Families Party and Cuomo. Cuomo's independent line is called Fight and Deliver. And then you got incumbent Eric Adams, who faced federal corruption charges that Trump lifted in return for Eric Adams cooperating with ICE raids, which has not endeared Adams to the progressive side, but the right wing of New York politics, which is, would be moderate centrist on the U.S. scale in general. He's created two lines, one called End Anti-Semitism, and the other called Safe and Affordable. And there's some people say, there are moderate Democrats who are going to vote for him instead of Cuomo, because just Cuomo is more compromised than even Eric Adams. The Republicans are running Curtis Sliwa, the Guardian Angels vigilante. That's what he's known for. There are a couple wealthy independents, a Wall Street investor, a prominent lawyer. So the general election, no matter who wins the Democratic primary, could be a free-for-all with 5 strong contenders. And the winner could, win with less than 30 or 35%. And that just shows us how self-serving and stupid the Democrats in New York City are. They set this up with RCV in the primary, but plurality voting in the general, because they figured, well, we'll always win the general because overwhelming enrollment in New York is Democratic. And they thought the RCV in the primaries would yield the most acceptable moderate in the general, although RCV doesn't necessarily yield that. They didn't want RCV in the general because they didn't want to be challenged by the Greens in a ranked choice voting election where the spoiler effect would not be in play. But now, I guess this is karma. The exclusionary system they set up may now exclude them from, electing their candidate as mayor in a general election. That's karma for you. So, how should the Greens relate to Mamdani? I haven't heard much discussion about it in New York City Greens or even New York State Greens. My first thoughts are to study Mamdani's campaign. As I indicated, the Greens can learn a lot from it. If I was in New York myself, with the public profile that I have in New York, so I have in Syracuse, so what I said might matter some, I would say I'm rooting for Mamdani in the Democratic primary. I can't vote in it, I'm a Green, but we don't have a candidate. And I would vote for him in general. And I would urge him to seek the Working Families Party line if he doesn't win the Democratic primary and keep going. If the New York City Greens had any energy, they could be participating in this election. There are 51 city council races. It only takes 450 signatures to get on as an independent. We have independent nominating petitions. You have to give it a party label, so you can give it the green label. We lost our ballot status because Cuomo, during the COVID lockdown, changed the law to 45,000 signatures in 45 days. So New York was the only state in the country with only Harris and Trump on the ballot. In 2022, only the Democrat and Republican were on the ballot for governor and the other statewide offices. That is extremely exclusionary. But down ballot, it's like it was before for independent candidates. So the Greens can and should be taking advantage of it, but are not doing that too much. So I kind of summarized my notes without looking at them. Oh, the other thing I would point out, in New York City, the council races are every 4 years. So since the Greens don't have any council candidates this year, they got to wait 4 years. But the assembly races are every 2 years. And in fact, the assembly districts are smaller. They're an average of 130,000 people, whereas the city council districts are an average of about 175,000 people. So they're smaller districts. The Greens could be running state assembly candidates as readily, and the petitioning requirements, I didn't look that up, but they're not onerous. I think it may be 1,000 statewide, but I'm not sure. But anyway, a serious campaign can get those signatures even in the limited 42 days. But this just underscores what I've been saying. If the Greens do not get back to organizing strong local parties and focusing on local offices as a foundation for credible runs for higher office, we're going to remain marginal to the politics of this country. So I think we should learn from Mamdani's campaign about messaging, grassroots fundraising, mass canvassing. Of course, the big problem is that the campaign is in the Democratic Party. In fact, he's making the Democratic Party, a neoliberal corporate militarist party, look much better than it is. And that is, I think, not, as Amilcar Cabral used to say, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. That's why I think running the Democratic Party undermines a serious independent left in this country. But there's no reason the Greens can't take lessons from the campaign. But for us, we've got to organize a mass party, and it's got to be dues paying. So we got the resources, and we start in our own localities. I think until the Greens start doing that, we're just talking and not doing serious organizing. So, wow, I went on 43 minutes. Sorry about that, but I hadn't given a commentary in 2 weeks, and so much is going on. So let's leave it there and look for your comments and questions. And I see, wow, there are a lot of them. I think no, that was something else. Okay, so here's a question. New York doesn't have a sore loser law that would prevent him from running on the Working Families Party line. Correct. I'm pretty sure about that. I know that it may have to do when the party does its nomination. It's complicated. I mean, what working families tend to do is they'll have a primary and their candidate, in this case Mamdani, will win. But then if they don't want to run that candidate in the general because they want to support the Democrat, they'll nominate that candidate for a judgeship that the candidate can't win, and you can run in any district for the judgeship. And that opens up the ballot line, and then the party says we're not running anybody. Or they'll put the Democrat. What they do is put the Democrat on that line. But I don't think we have a sore loser law. Maybe somebody will correct me on that, but it's never been a question for us Greens. I mean, we run as Greens. And if we lose the Green nomination, we don't go off and try to get the Democratic nomination or something else. Aaron Ingebrigtsen, you a cousin to that runner in Norway who has all the world records? Who will enforce the law against President Trump? Do Congress and SCOTUS have actual teeth? Well, they do. They can make statements. I don't know how much SCOTUS is going to help us. Congress could, although with Republicans controlling both houses, that's tough. But in the end, and Trump has already done this by defying court orders. It's like Andrew Jackson reputedly said when I think a judge, the Supreme Court told him the Indian Removal Act in Georgia was unconstitutional. He said, well, let them enforce that, basically saying, do you have an army? Or Stalin once told the Catholic Pope, who was urging him to, what was he urging him to do? Oh, the Pope was trying to get Stalin to mobilize the Catholics against the Nazis, something like that. And Stalin reportedly said to the Pope, or when heard about that, said, how many divisions does the Pope have? So what I'm saying is, in the end, the enforcement comes down to who has the forces, the armed forces. And then it's a question, will armed forces be loyal to the Constitution or the president? The oath members of the military take is they take an oath to the Constitution, not to a political leader. Now, there's a different oath for officers and enlisted people. The officers, that's all they make an oath to the Constitution. The enlisted people make an oath to the Constitution and to follow the orders of their commanders. So that's one question. And then you've got these paramilitary forces like ICE and Border Patrol and Secret Service and others who have been very right-wing. I mean, I think Border Patrol even showed up at the one of Trump's campaign rallies in 2000 on the White House lawn, which is illegal, but, that's something he got away with. So, what I think is the other factor that has a force is the people. And I skipped this over in my notes. I talked about the 3.5%. Yeah. When there's mass popular resistance, particularly nonviolent resistance, it becomes very difficult for armed forces to crack down because the people in the militaries are related to the people on the streets. They can identify with them if they're not, formally related by family. And a lot of these revolutions happen when the armed forces refuse to fire. That's what happened in Iran in 1979. That's what happened in the Philippines in the People's Power Revolution in the 80s. That's what happened in South Korea recently, although they had a Congress that acted very soon. But the people were on the streets right away after martial law, and the armed forces didn't fire on them and try to really suppress them. And that forced Congress, their Congress, to act, and martial law was repealed within hours. And then it became a battle in the courts. But that's where you have a legislature that will stand up. Same thing in Brazil. The legislature impeached Bolsonaro for attempted insurrection after he lost an election. Our Congress did not do that after Trump did the same thing. The LA deployment has been inspiring that the military has not been inspiring that the military will stand with the Constitution. The first test is to show that they will follow Trump's orders. Well, I think the test is not when they report the duty they're ordered to. It's when they have to use armed force. And, that's when, like during the Black riots after the Martin Luther King assassination, some units refused to deploy to the streets. And this happened even before the even larger 1967 summer revolt. But other units refused to fire, and some did fire. But I think the fact that the National Guard and the Marines reported the duty as ordered doesn't indicate what they'll do if it really becomes a fight. So, if you know any people in the military, be talking to them. We should be fraternizing with them and telling them to stick to the Constitution, not Putin. I mean, not Trump. You think Trump will go against the Constitution and run again? I think that depends more on his health than anything else. He'd have a hard time getting the Constitution changed. I think we don't need to worry about that right now. We need to worry about, backing him away from his worst instincts now and getting Congress to put up some backbone and pass some legislation that will check him. Aaron Ingebrigtsen, would a mass general strike help stop this madness? Yeah, there are people talking about it. People are signing online petitions. I think one of them's got over 100,000 or maybe a few 100,000, but it's still a drop in the bucket. And, who are the organizers? The organized labor isn't down with that. The closest they have is when the UAW leader, Shawn Fain, is urging unions to synchronize their contracts to all end when the UAW does at the in the spring of, I think it's 2027. So they could coordinate strikes and have a general strike to win some political as well as contract demands. That's what it would take. I know a lot of people are online pleading for a general strike, but I don't see anybody really with the capacity to organize it. But I may be missing something, but it would help. I mean, you kind of have a de facto general strike on the part of Latinos worried about being deported. They're not showing up to work. So construction sites, agricultural fields, restaurants, hospitality at hotels are suffering. They're going on strike not with demands, just to avoid ICE. So, and Trump's kind of acknowledged that by saying, well, maybe we shouldn't go after the agricultural workers. He's hearing from the farmers. There's an article in the local paper about a dairy farmer here. He said, look, all my workers are undocumented, and I know it. I've got Social Security numbers and all that for them, but we know they're fake. And they pay taxes. They'll never see the benefits from them. And he needs them because nobody else will do the work. So anyway, there's kind of a general strike by Latinos going on who are worried about being snatched by ICE. Via email, response to Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil being released from detention. Yeah, I was glad to see it. I saw a little bit of his news conference a little while ago. But we need to keep defending him. I saw it on MSNBC, and they had a Democratic congressman from Massachusetts attacking Khalil for being a Hamas supporter, which he's not. He blamed him for when Mahmoud said he was going to continue to defend Palestinian human rights. This guy, criticized him for not criticizing Hamas for its attack on October 7th, which, just goes to show you how distorted our Congress is, including the Democrats. So I'm glad to see him out, but we got to keep defending him because I don't think the administration's done with him, nor are the people that are supporting Israel right or wrong, like this Democrat who was on MSNBC this afternoon. Charles Keener, I don't agree that Iran is imperialist in the U.S.-Israeli sense. What has Iran invaded, occupied? Yeah, they're a much smaller imperialist power, but they're a regional imperialist power. They have had a lot to do with who governs Iraq with the Shiite militias that they armed and sponsored. In Syria, they were moving Shias into Syria and like they did in Iraq, trying to ethnically cleanse the areas they're moving into of Sunni Syrians. And they're getting into the real estate business. They're business people, somewhat in competition with the Russians, who also, were looking, for the reconstruction and real estate opportunities there. So yeah, they are intervening in many countries. Yemen, Lebanon with Hezbollah. Even though Hamas is Sunni, they did give some arms to Hamas and moral support. So, yeah, they're a regional imperialist power, a sub-imperialist power. I don't think that's deniable. And you say, have they invaded, occupied? Well, they've had proxy forces in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, but you don't have to occupy and invade to be imperialist. You can have neo-colonial relations of domination. So it's not Iranian Shiite militias going to Lebanon, but it's they set up their allies, Hezbollah, and have influence and enable them, for example, to get business opportunities in Lebanon. So that's why I think you can call Iran an imperialist power. But it's much smaller than the U.S. Israeli imperialists who are attacking them, and they're really suffering for it. Via email, have you heard about the potential dropping of a AUKUS sub-program that was discussed a few years ago? Dropping by who? Was that by the U.S. Or Australia or the U.K.? I have not heard any news on that. I would imagine the most likely candidate would be the U.S. if it's happening, because they want to cut by Trump, as it's not America first. Okay, well, I'm going to look up, the reports on that. Trump is a problem for the military-industrial complex just because he's so erratic, and always often switching his position. So. That's one of those things that if it was dropped, it might be picked up again tomorrow. So that's interesting. I'll search the internet to see if I can find out more about that. Andrew Hager, Howie, I recently read a headline that World War III is being threatened with threats to delete Trump. Is there any credible evidence to support this rumor? Threats by who to get rid of Trump? I don't know who's threatening Trump physically. Trump has threatened the Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran with elimination. He said, we know where he is and we can do it if we want. He claims to have stopped Netanyahu from doing it. The Iranians have threatened those kinds of assassinations. Maybe the headline by Iran. Okay. Yeah, well, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. If Iran succeeded in assassinating Trump, would it lead to World War III? I don't know. I don't think so, because if we went back and attacked Iran, what big power would defend Iran? Russia's not defending Iran militarily with the attacks going on now. China's helping covertly, but they're not going to send their military. So I don't think it leads to World War III. I think it would strengthen right-wing forces around the world, because Trump would go from being a clown to a martyr. And, they'd build up the myth of Trump, and it would be terrible. So, I want to see Trump die peacefully in his sleep. And the sooner the better. But, God, I hope that doesn't get me in trouble with the Secret Service. But, no, I don't think he should be assassinated. Okay, there's the banner. We've used up our hour. Sorry I talked so much. It was just a lot to cover, and I appreciate your questions, and we'll do question and answers next time. Maybe I won't talk so much, and I plan to not talk so much so we can have more give and take. I don't have a guest planned, although that could change, but we will be here next week, 3:00 Eastern time. I don't know if there's any announcements I need to make. So I hope everybody has a good week. And, is active in organizing. David Shoebridge, I see that in the chat. Is there an announcement regarding him? Oh, yeah, there is. David Shoebridge is a Green senator in Australia. And on July 3rd, I believe, July 5th, that's Saturday, I will be at the Socialism 2025 conference. I'm speaking on independent politics, debating some DSA people and others about the Democrats and other strategies. And I'm also speaking on a panel about Ukraine solidarity. So I'll be busy. I won't be able to do a live broadcast. So we taped a interview with David Shoebridge, who is leading the fight against AUKUS, which was mentioned in a question. That stands for Australia, UK, Britain, and the US. And it's a nuclear submarine deal. Australia is building bases, or a base for US and UK submarines, and sometime in the 30s, Australia gets a nuclear attack submarine, although few Australians believe that's actually going to come to happen. And the Greens, led by David Shoebridge, are opposing that. So, this interview will talk about what that is and why we should fight against it. So that's coming up July 3rd. But we have 1 week before then, so that's June 28th. So that's the next one. And I will be here, maybe with a guest, probably not, and we'll take your questions and comments if I don't, and talk more about what's going on. In the meantime, as I was saying, stay active in organizing because it makes a difference. And we will stop Trump, and we'll get to better days. So everybody take care.